ever think about materials that aren't just static, materials that, become something else, like things that can change shape or maybe deliver medicine right where it's needed, or even help build structures we just couldn't make before?
Yeah, it's a fascinating space.
It really is. It's where chemistry and manufacturing are converging in some pretty incredible ways.
Absolutely.
So today we're doing a deep dive into one specific tiny player that's having a huge impact: cyclodextrins.
Yeah. Yes, CDs.
And they're, frankly, a surprising role in really cutting-edge stuff like 3D and even 4D printing.
Right.
You sent in some great sources on this, digging into the research. It really shows how these molecules are enabling things that, well, push the boundaries.
That's the plan. Our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the key insights from those materials you shared. Figure out what makes these cyclodextrins, CDs, such unique building blocks for these printing methods.
Especially for medicine, right? That seems like a big area.
Exactly. Especially looking at the potential there.
Okay, let's get into it then. Before the printing part, what exactly are cyclodextrins? What's their fundamental, trick?
So at their heart, cyclodextrins are natural molecules.
Yeah.
Safe. They're basically these ring-shaped sugars, oligosaccharides.
Okay.
Think of them like tiny, sort of sustainable donuts. And that donut shape is really the key.
How so?
Well, the outside of the donut, it's water-friendly, hydrophilic. But the hole in the middle, the cavity, that's hydrophobic. It doesn't like water.
Ah, okay.
So it likes to attract and sort of hold on to things that also don't like water, like oils or, crucially, a lot of drug molecules.
Gotcha. So they grab onto the oily bits.
Precisely. This ability to host other molecules inside that cavity is incredibly valuable. You can take something that normally clumps up or won't dissolve in water, tuck it inside a CD,
And suddenly it mixes?
and suddenly it can be dispersed nice and evenly in water-based stuff. Plus, you can chemically tweak them, add functional groups to the outside, which makes them even more versatile for different jobs.
So they're like molecular escorts, getting things that normally avoid each other to hang out together.
That's a great way to put it.
Yep.
Yeah, molecular chaperones or escorts. And that hosting ability is absolutely fundamental to how they help in 3D printing.
Right.
It affects both the printing process itself and the actual printed structure. The sources you sent really highlight how this lets printers use more sustainable water-based inks.
Okay.
Because now those inks can carry these lipophilic early compounds, forming what are called inclusion complexes.
Inclusion complexes.
And it gets even more interesting. They can influence the material while it's being printed. They can form these reversible supramolecular assemblies.
Meaning
Weak, temporary bonds between the CD and other molecules in the mix. This can give the material like self-healing properties.
self-healing during printing.
Yeah, which is really useful in extrusion printing. As you lay down layers, these weak bonds can form and break and reform, helping the layers stick together properly, preventing defects.
That's clever.
It is. And they can even help with the chemistry needed for printing, like photocross linking, using light to harden the material. CDs can help make the necessary chemicals soluble in the water-based ink to begin with.
Okay. One specific technique mentioned in the sources was direct powder extrusion, DPE. That sounded particularly relevant. How does that work? Simply. And why are CDs good for it?
DPE is, it's a really neat approach. See, most 3D printing needs a filament first, right? Like a spool of plastic or some kind of preformed material.
Right.
DPE skips that step. You start directly with a powder. A mix of everything you need, the base material, the cyclodextrin, and importantly, your active ingredient, maybe a drug.
All just mixed together as powder.
Exactly. You feed that powder mix into the printer, it gets heated just enough to soften and extrude, and then it's printed layer by layer.
And the benefit?
Well, especially for sensitive things like drugs, it's a single, relatively gentle process. You avoid lots of heating cycles or harsh solvents you might need to make a filament.
Less damaging to the drug.
Precisely. It also means you can often pack in much higher amounts of the drug directly into the powder blend. And that's where CDs are critical. They help get those often poorly soluble drug molecules evenly dispersed within that powder mix right from the start.
Okay, that makes sense. But here's where I think it gets really interesting. How do CDs go beyond just helping the printing and actually boost the function of the final object, especially thinking about medicine again?
Yes. This is where that host-guest chemistry really pays off in terms of performance. A huge challenge in medicine is that many modern drugs just aren't very soluble in water.
Right, I've heard that.
So when you swallow a pill, the drug doesn't dissolve well in your stomach or intestines, and your body just can't absorb it properly. poor bioavailability, we call it.
So it doesn't work as well.
Or you need much higher doses, which can mean more side effects. Cyclodextrins can be game changers here. By forming that stable inclusion complex, trapping the drug molecule inside, they massively improve how soluble it is and how fast it dissolves when it hits water, like in your gut. The drug is essentially sort of pre-dissolved within the CD.
Making it much easier for the body to grab onto it.
Exactly. It boosts absorption. The source that mentioned budesonide, that's a classic poorly water-soluble drug, is a perfect case study for how CDs fix this exact problem.
Okay.
And because 3D printing lets you control the formulation, so precisely the type of CD, the other ingredients, the structure, you can design the printed object, say a tablet, to release that now soluble drug exactly how you want.
Like slow release or fast or triggered release?
All of the above. You can tailor it to the specific need.
Okay, that's 3D printing. Now, 4D printing, that sounds pretty sci-fi. What is 4D printing?
It does sound futuristic, yeah. But it's very real. Basically, 4D printing is 3D printing plus the dimension of time. You print a 3D object, but it's engineered so that its shape or its properties or even its function changes over time when it encounters a specific trigger.
Like what kind of trigger?
Could be anything, really. Heat, light, water, or humidity, maybe a change in pH, even physical force.
And cyclodextrins are involved here too. How?
They're turning out to be key players. They act as the responsive agents in many of these 4D systems because those interactions we talked about, the host-guest complex, the supramolecular bonds, they can be sensitive to those same triggers. Humidity, temperature, pH.
So the trigger disrupts the CD interaction.
Exactly, or changes them. So if you build CDs into the material structure, the whole printed object can sense and react to its environment.
Okay, that's clever.
There was one source describing a process, I think they called it kinetic trapping, developed by a group at Dartmouth. Really fascinating stuff.
Kinetic trapping, what's the idea?
They designed an ink using CDs and other molecules like PEG. And by carefully controlling the printing and cooling, they essentially freeze the molecules in a temporary unstable state like cocking a spring.
Okay, a meta-stable state.
Right. Then they use moisture, water, as the trigger. The water molecules interact with the CDs and the PEG in a specific way that allows that trapped structure to relax.
The spring uncoils.
Basically, yes. It relaxes into a new, stable shape, so the object transforms.
And didn't they show this with a printed flower?
They did. A brilliant demonstration. They printed this flower shape using their special CD PEG ink.
Right.
But the really smart part was how they printed it. They varied the molecular arrangement slightly in different parts of the flower. So different areas had different flexibility, different sensitivity to moisture.
So not the whole thing reacted the same way.
Exactly. When they exposed the printed flower to humidity, the parts designed to be sensitive, the petals started to curl up and close because the water allowed those trapped molecules to rearrange. But the base, designed differently, stayed rigid.
Wow. So you get complex, controlled shape changes just from humidity.
It perfectly shows how CDs can enable localized responses, different parts reacting differently to the same stimulus. That's key for creating complex transformations.
Okay, so bringing this all together, the ability to print tricky stuff, control drug properties, and add this responsiveness.
Yeah.
The biomedical potential seems huge.
It really is incredibly exciting. One of the sources you sent detailed a study that pulls so many of these threads together beautifully. It was about budesonide-loaded mini tablets.
The drug you mentioned earlier.
The very same. Printed specifically for kids with a condition called eosinophilic colitis.
Okay, what's the challenge there?
Well, it's an inflammatory condition in the colon, mainly in children. You need to get the drug, budesonide, delivered right there to the colon. But first problem. Budesonide mostly comes in adult formulations. Dosing accurately for small kids is hard, involves awkward off-label use.
Right, crushing tablets, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Second problem, as we said, budesonide is poorly soluble. Third problem, you need it to work in the colon, not get absorbed higher up in the gut.
So, multiple hurdles.
Yeah.
How did 3D printing with CDs solve this?
Okay, so first, they use DPE, the Direct Powder Extrusion method, to print tiny mini tablets. Perfect for kids, right? You can print the exact dose needed, very flexible, and they're small, easy to swallow.
Solves the dosing problem.
Solves the dosing. Then, into the powder mix, they added a specific cyclodextrin, hydroxypropyl cyclodextrin, or HPCD.
Okay.
This one is particularly good at forming that inclusion complex with budesonide. Result: massively improved solubility and dissolution rate.
Solves the solubility problem.
Solves solubility. Finally, they coated the mini tablets with an enteric coating. This is a spiral layer designed to only dissolve when the pH gets high enough.
Like in the colon.
Precisely. The colon environment is typically above pH 7.0, so the tablet passes through the acidic stomach through the small intestine intact. Only when it reaches the colon does the coating dissolve, releasing the budesonide, which is now nice and soluble thanks to the CD exactly where it needs to act.
That's really elegant. It's not just printing a shape, it's using the chemistry of the CD and the precision of the printing process together to overcome multiple barriers for a really specific patient need.
It's a fantastic example. Chemistry and advanced manufacturing, truly hand in hand, solving problems for a vulnerable group, making the drug usable, getting the dose right, and targeting it.
Amazing.
And the sources pointed to so much more potential beyond that one example. Things like polymeric nanoparticles, using CDs for targeted drug delivery, hoping for better results, fewer side effects.
Okay.
Research into PCD-based nanocomposites for really tough diseases like atherosclerosis, even cancer therapies, using BCD nanofibers for tissue scaffolds in wound healing, providing structure and releasing drugs.
Wow.
BCD hydrogels for localized therapy, even using CDs as the responsive bit in wearable sensors. It's a really broad field opening up.
Okay, so let's pull back a bit. For you, the listener, what's the big takeaway here? Why should you care about these cyclodextrin donuts getting mixed up with 3D and 4D printing?
I think it matters because it really showcases this powerful synergy happening right now. You've got fundamental chemistry, material science, and cutting-edge manufacturing all coming together.
Right.
It shows how understanding a specific molecule, like the cyclodextrin, down to its basic properties that donut shape, that cavity, can unlock completely new capabilities in how we make things.
It's not just abstract science.
Not at all. It's enabling incredibly personalized products, especially in medicine. We're moving towards a future where we can make medicines tailored precisely for an individual, the right dose, the right size, the right release pattern, overcoming huge hurdles like poor drug solubility or getting drugs to the right spot in the body.
Like those budesonide mini tablets.
Exactly. And beyond that, it's driving this whole field of smart materials. Objects that aren't just passive, but can actively sense their environment and respond in programmed ways.
Adaptive systems.
Adaptive systems, yeah. Whether it's a drug delivery device that releases its payload only under certain conditions, or maybe a structure that changes shape when the temperature changes. It opens up so many possibilities.
So fundamentally, cyclodextrins are making 3D and 4D printing much more versatile, much more powerful, letting us print with difficult materials, making drugs work better, adding responsiveness. They're helping print things like personalized medicines and these amazing shape-changing structures.
Absolutely. And that really leads to a fascinating question to think about. As we get better at designing materials that can sense and respond, not just in a lab, but to real-world triggers like pH or humidity or light, how might that change things? Not just how we deliver medicine, which is huge in itself, but how we design everyday objects. How might they start to interact with us and with the world around them in entirely new ways? Something to really mull over.